So, we have about 20 minutes for this fireside chat, and we're hoping that it will be something impactful and a fun discussion. So, thank you all for being here. 20 more minutes, you guys can have your lunch. I will still love for everyone to dive into this conversation with me a little bit more. So, my name is Glenn, Director for Global Affairs at the Blockchain for Good Alliance. I have Xion with me from the Xion Foundation, the CBO. So, I will leave it to Xion to do a quick introduction about yourself before we actually dive a little bit more into the state of the industry. Blockchain social impact is a view from both the BGA and Xion, considering that a little bit of Impact Alpha, if you want to call it, we're going to have a collaboration next year in 2026, so something that we're both looking very much forward to.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn, and very happy to be here with all of you. My name is Xion, and my main focus at Xion is really ecosystem growth and getting distribution for the technology that we're building. And Xion started about 4 years ago, and the entire premise from the start has always been how do we bring blockchain technology to the masses? How do we break out of crypto? We've always been very non-DeFi and always focused on consumer use cases. And we're currently working with large corporations like Uber, BMW, American Eagle, and hundreds of other brands that are all leveraging this technology, and a lot of them don't even know that it's crypto. And that's really kind of the core of a lot of what we're even talking about today, of how do we implement this technology in everyday use cases, specifically here about social good, but in ways where people don't need to know anything about the complexities of the tech in the background. All they care about is, how is this going to help me? What can the technology do for me?
Nice, okay. So I think we want to start with perhaps just a quick brief overview of the industry itself, right, before we dive into what Xion is doing. So, I'm a strong believer that blockchain will one day reach mass adoption, as I'm sure many people in this room do as well. So, but blockchain accelerates towards mass adoption, where you link blockchain and social impact. Now it becomes even narrower, right? So with what Xion is doing right now, what are your thoughts on the most exciting trends or opportunities in the industry, and how can we go into this together?
Well, I think what's kind of funny, sad, but also exciting is a lot of the discussions that we've had today around the different use cases of blockchain have been the ones that have been talked about for over 10 years now, around the benefits of transparency, the benefits of public ledgers, accountability and settlement rails, and all these different things that have been kind of the core since day one. Yet we haven't really seen that many strong applications of it. Like the industry is still fighting to really kind of break out, has fought against a lot of perceptions issues, and taking that and then taking events like today's, where there's a lot of positive change that's happening, like even just the fact that we're having these discussions, and that we're having a lot of government organizations actually taking part in these, and we're seeing a lot of these initiatives. It's clearly there's a step in the right direction, and I think that's what's exciting, because the technology is at a point where it can be used and adopted. And it's just taken a while, but now that we're seeing, even regulations becoming a lot clearer, so it's a lot easier for people to be able to operate in those rails. And I think we're kind of at that point. It feels like an inflection point of, this can accelerate very quickly.
I fully agree, and this is also one of the strongest reasons why we're super excited to be working with the Xion Foundation next year in carrying out one of the joint funds that we'll be having, BGA's main pillars of initiatives. So really, Xion, if you guys do a little bit of research on Xion Foundation, there are a couple of taglines that are very interesting, right? Make crypto disappear, as well as verify anything. So perhaps, Xion, you want to elaborate a little bit more on what it means to make crypto disappear, and what it means by verify anything, and really how does these two taglines essentially fit into our broader mandate here in driving blockchain for good?
Yeah, that's a good question, and definitely they're used to kind of get people's attention, right? Like, okay, you're in the crypto industry, why are you trying to make crypto disappear? Like, what do you mean by that? And very simply, it comes down to kind of two things. There's making crypto usable, which means all the complexity like I talked about in the background, where people can use the technology like on their phones, logging in with email, not have to know anything about the jargon and gas fees and tokens, anything like that. And then on the other side of it is how do we make it usable? And I think that's a lot of the discussions that we're having at this conference is, okay, what pain points are we solving? And so when we talk about, verify anything, for us it's the core of our infrastructure allows you to do that. And then you can plug that into a lot of use cases. So for example, when we talk about the companies that we're working with, they're utilizing our stack to be able to verify that they're actually, for example, advertising to real users and not humans. We're working with some companies in their fraud department so that they can verify that the claims that are being made are coming from real people, from real first-party data. So it's kind of this blend of both first making it usable, and then now making it useful.
And these are really the core principles that will allow blockchain to become a bit more mainstream, right? Where it disappears in the superficial sense of things, and people don't realize the technology or even the tokens that are essentially running these applications that people are using on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's very interesting. I think it ties in very well considering that Xion has such strong ties to a lot of major Web2 players, like you just mentioned earlier as well. So, when I talk about blockchain for good, right, I always like to challenge mindsets. And it's really about, systemic change rather than just charity. So many times people think when I introduce the Blockchain for Good Alliance, they just think that this is a charity organization. And then they think it's kind of boring because charity, and doing social impact tends to belong to more of the government and public sector, right? People think that it's the job of the ministries, it's the job of NGOs and NPOs. It's not so much for private sector candidates like ourselves in a sense. So really more than charity, more than speculation, definitely more than crypto itself. So John, really from your perspective, what does this systemic change really look like when we talk about blockchain's role in social impact? And do you have any examples, in the companies that you're working with, especially the ones that you named? How are you guys working with them to accelerate this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there's no one sort of answer to like how do you bring about systemic change, and usually takes time. But I think it comes from different angles. Like one of the big ones, obviously, is having involvement from policymakers, governments, and decision makers in a lot of ways, as we're seeing today, as we're seeing with these collaborations. To be able to, incite change. But I think fundamentally it just comes from, okay, what pain points are we solving? Like, why is this technology helpful in ways? And I think as those use cases come about, that's where systemic change can happen, because, as you have a lot more of these examples of how this technology is being leveraged, then, there's a lot more, investment that goes into it. There's a lot more growth acceleration. More people become aware of it. There's wider distribution, and I think that's how you end up getting to it. But I think the industry's been very stuck in a little bubble of like speaking to each other in like very technical terms, like focusing on the tech side rather than like, okay, what are we actually applying it to? And what's been interesting even from the panels today is like you hear about the ways that government organizations can leverage this to have very like transparent ways of distributing money and doing so in way more efficient ways. So I think that's to kind of summarize, like I think systemic change can't happen from one day to the next, but a lot of the initiatives that we're working on, and even the reason that what you're about to introduce is to get to that stage.
Absolutely. So I'm going to jump on your wagon and your answer to really do a quick introduction to what we do. So the Blockchain for Good Alliance has a major pillar that we call the joint fund. So we've been working with multiple partners on an institutional and organizational level to actually carry out collaborative funding pools that allow us to resource match to really amplify our impact. So on a very broad level, how it works is, of course, the BGA is one partner, we work with another partner, we collaborate on a funding pool, and with the funds in that pool, we run thematic programs, right? Be it hackathons, be it workshops. We encourage projects to be building on our partners' ecosystems with a BGA kind of lens, right? So in this way, of course, Xion Foundation and the other partners that we work with, they're able to grow their ecosystems, and at the same time, the BGA has more, on-the-ground kind of grassroots involvement with new projects that are being built. So this is how the Blockchain for Good Alliance carries out our joint fund initiative. So there are many numerous funds and accelerators in Web3, right? But not many are actually centered on around the for good side of things. And it's also through this joint fund initiative of the Alliance that we're working with the UNDP for the SDG Blockchain Accelerator. Of course, it's disguised under a much broader and technical term in a way. But of course, not to talk about competition, right? But it's going to be interesting for our upcoming BGA and Xion joint fund. I want to hear from you, Chan. What is unique about this compared to every other program out there, especially in our focus on real-world impact as well as ecosystem building? What really sets us apart?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there's a few things. You have a lot of examples of funds out there that are kind of like the fund and forget model, which is basically, here's money, I hope it works out, and very broad definitions of what they're trying to achieve, and then they'll come back 6 months later and see if it happened. And I think one of the core tenets of the fund, and even the reason why we've named it more of an accelerator, is because it's going to be a very hands-on process. And the reason that we're working with BGA is because there's a lot of complementary skill sets that we're bringing to the table in terms of why we're working together. Obviously with these sort of conferences and connections to different government organizations and groups that are trying to bring about social good, they're able to bring that to the table. And then we have on our side our existing ecosystem and our technology, and kind of combining those for the joint fund. And I think in this space in general, there just isn't much of a focus on how can blockchain bring about social good. So that's definitely probably one of the first few funds that's working on that. But then just in general, a fund that's really focused on what are the use cases that are going to come out of it, what are the pain points that we're solving, and I think a combination of those things, and the way that we're going to run the program is there's going to be lots of different partners from mentors, from existing companies, founders. There's going to be a whole venture network, obviously, to help them get funding, and then there's going to be in-person events. So it's going to be a whole wide range of really hands-on work across the entire sort of product lifecycle.
And we're also going to be a little bit more focused on the US region for this one, even though we want to operate on a global level as well. So it's going to be exciting to see that, the open call basically, to see how many people will actually apply from across the world. So really, as we prepare for applications for this one, so what criteria will we both actually look at, right? Of course, this is not set in stone just yet. This is really a little bit of an alpha, so it's subject to changes, right? But I want to also understand from the Xion side of things, and I will talk about BGA side of things afterwards. What criteria are we looking at when we consider the top projects that we will ultimately take into this joint fund, and how we are going to ensure that they are fully aligned with our impact goals in areas, say, inequality reduction, sustainability, or anywhere else where blockchain for impact is meant to be.
Yeah, and I think one of the top criterias that probably also goes to your last question about what sort of sets it apart is we're very focused on making sure that the projects that are part of the accelerator and that we back have real viable business models. And I think we've seen this a lot in the industry where there's a million different hackathons, there's a really big prize money, but then, after the hackathon, the project teams don't continue working on it. And I think for us, in order to bring about change and, actually solve problems, and one of the discussions earlier was how do you go from pilot to actual, sustainable growth and scale. I think it all starts with, are they building a viable business that they can, sustain? Even though you're driving social good, you need to make sure that your business is bringing in revenue so that you can actually keep on developing and growing. And so I think that's one of the top level criteria for us is okay, what is, not only what pain point are they solving, but how are they going to make it viable so that they can scale? There's a few others, which is we've seen this a lot where industry expertise and problem space expertise really makes a huge difference in terms of when someone's actually building a company trying to solve a certain problem. If they're not familiar with that problem from a fundamental level, they're going to have a hard time, solving it. They're not going to know the ins and outs. And so I think part of the criteria is whatever use cases people are deciding to solve that are related to social good, social impact, they have to be experts in that field or really be deeply familiar to be able to even know, how to tackle the problem. So I think those are some, core ones, and then obviously, the typical one around quality of the team, etc.
I think this is where we are very much aligned as well. I'm going to echo your sentiments. There are so many times, right? Because we sponsor so many hackathons around the world. Some of the projects are so, they are so innovative actually. So it's either the projects that are very innovative, that's why they win, and then they forget about it afterwards and they just vanished and gone to the next bounty, or they are just trying to perhaps value wash themselves to kind of fit into what the bounty is asking for. So many projects try to greenwash themselves and I'm a blockchain for a good project, but it doesn't make sense when you really look at it. So it's also nice to know because, it is something that the BGA often sees as a sort of a problem in the industry, because we have always been wanting to, bring in notable projects from the hackathons that we sponsor into our incubation, and then from our incubation on a larger level to the joint fund, and ultimately to showcase them on an impact stage, like the Blockchain Impact Forum, for example. So this is really how we have this synergy in the pillars of the Blockchain for Good Alliance that we're doing. In Web3, of course, we know that great ideas often start strong, but scaling is challenging. Similarly to what we were just discussing about hackathons, right? The idea always makes sense in theory until it's really put to the test in the real world, and then you realize it's not scalable, and there's 1,000,001 problems that it faces. So for this entire joint fund that we're doing, I'm sure that we will definitely deep dive into discussions on the mechanisms that we can put in place to ensure that the selected projects that we take in don't necessarily just remain as pilots, but ultimately are able to scale not just on a local or regional, but really on a global level, because that accelerates both what Xion is building towards as well as the real world impact that we're looking at. So just run us through real quick, because I know time is pretty limited. Yes, I think we only have about 3 to 5 minutes left. Do run us through a little bit about what kind of mechanisms you have in mind off the top of your head, how we're going to make sure that these projects are put to the test.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some of it is related to a few things we've already spoken about, which is obviously the selection criteria, like making sure that the projects are going after relevant problems. They're going after a problem space where, it makes sense to scale outside of a pilot. Like the pilot is just to get to a proof point, but they can see a world in which they can actually tackle a big problem. And then there's also like the way that we go about with the hands-on support throughout the joint fund and the accelerator is really how are we going to help them across the entire product lifecycle, from the engineering side to the marketing side to the product side to the growth side, and then obviously the funding side, right? Like having a syndicate of funds and venture capitalists that can really help invest and turn it from a pilot to a real company that actually has funds. And again, there's the venture side, but then there's the business model side as well of like how can they be self-sustainable. So I think it's like combining all of these things together that's really important, so that it's not just 12 months down the line these projects move on to something else, but actually how can we get them to a stage where we give them the guidance, we give them the funds, we give them the network to prove out the point, and then they can go off and scale. And that's really like the core of why we're launching this. Like we don't care about the vanity metrics of 3 more apps building, in our ecosystem. Like that's never kind of been our approach to our ecosystem, and that's also not how we actually bring about, systemic change like you were saying earlier.
I think the bottom line of all our discussions is real world impact is what makes a real change in the world. It's easier said than done, but I'm of course glad that there are different partners like Xion that exist that helps the BGA really push this whole motion forward. So of course we have run out of time for this one, unfortunately. I could go on for another couple of hours, definitely deep diving into like the technicalities of how we're going to run this joint fund. But of course, just to do a quick wrap up, what's exciting for us is carrying out more of these major collaborations with different institutional partners moving forward into 2026. How we like to see our collaboration with Xion going is really tackling the very critical issues, when we talk about verification, talk about authenticity of things, and making crypto disappear. It's kind of a paradox, right, when you think about it. It doesn't make sense when people look at it at the first glance, but I think that's precisely what's the right thing to do in ensuring that blockchain has real world and good impact. It's really letting people know and see for themselves what impact really means for the industry. So of course, thank you very much to everyone in this room. I'm not going to hold back on you guys' lunchtime. So yes, thank you very much. And of course, John from Xion Foundation, thank you very much for joining me on this stage.